Hello and welcome to our podcast series Mediation Tips by Fran. Today, we are talking about how to mediate online when domestic violence is alleged. I am Natalia Olowska Pierre, advocate, mediator, and arbitrator from Warsaw, Poland.
I'm Mac Pierre, attorney, mediator, and arbitrator, and working throughout Florida and Texas.
And I'm Fran Brochstein, a Texas attorney and mediator.
All right, so we are here with Fran again to talk about a topic that's pretty important, and that's domestic violence. Some months ago, back in October 2020, Fran had written an article during Family Violence Awareness Month, where she talked about family violence during the mediation process. It was very important because this is something that happens all the time. Unfortunately, it keeps happening, and that's where people suffer violence from the hands of people who are supposed to love them and care for them. And when they find themselves at the mediation table, the mediation process can get a little complicated when there's violence being alleged from one person to another, especially when they're in a relationship. And so we wanted to discuss the topic again this time because, again, it's always timely. And so we're hoping that if this will help somebody out there, it will benefit somebody out there. You guys will take some of this advice and include it into the mediation that you might be attending, because certainly we don't want anybody out there to be facing domestic violence or abuse. And so this is why, again, the topic is important because it unfortunately just keeps happening. But I'm introducing the topic right now. And Fran, you have been doing mediations for many, many years. And why don't you open up the floor just about your experiences with family violence and then how you've transitioned dealing with family violence in the online mediation world?
Well, first of all, I tell people, and we'll say divorce, but it could be just ending any kind of relationship. When you're ending a relationship, I always warn people the person you're dealing with is a stranger. It's not the person you knew, because often, all of a sudden, a side of their personality pops out that is so negative that the other person has never seen before. And I take domestic violence very seriously because in my personal life, I've lost 2 friends and family members to domestic violence episodes of murder-suicides. So I always warn people that if your gut tells you, I need to get out of here, or I'm not safe, or something is going on, trust your gut and go. You can replace your furniture, you can replace your stuff, but you cannot replace your life.
And I need to tell you that from the Polish and European perspective, for many years, the allegation of domestic violence was a factor that was being taken into account and was prohibitive when going into mediation, because people were taking the perspective that there isn't equality of parties in the case of domestic violence because one person is always suppressed, is always frightened. There can't be an open and frank conversation between a perpetrator of domestic violence and a victim of domestic violence. Things have changed though, and with a better awareness of domestic violence and also better protective measures, these mediations are possible, and especially when it comes to online mediation. We, all of us sitting here, all 3 of us, we will recommend absolutely online mediation for any case where domestic violence is alleged. And let us all express ourselves why.
Yeah, so when we were founding instantmediations.com, one of the main reasons as to why we were pushing online mediations was because of family violence, right? Domestic violence, because we saw very early on that it was a very easy solution to help people who are in conflict, especially conflict that way, negotiate and talk about things. Again, I hear what Natalia says about how can 2 people between whom there's allegations of family violence really speak on a level playing field? Is that possible? Well, in Texas, specifically in Texas, there are plenty of cases where a judge will grant a person the right not to have to go to mediation where family violence is being alleged. But some judges, differ. They'll say, well, you know what, you guys can still talk things out, especially if you have kids together. But we're just going to do it in a place where you two don't have to see each other, and where there's security, where the mediator can kind of take some control, where people can be safe and feel safe. But online mediation then provides all of that, all those benefits to us, right? So you can sit from an unknown location, safe and sound, without the fear that somebody's going to know where you're located or where you are speaking from, and be able to discuss it that way. So certainly online mediation is safer. Fran, how have you implemented, or how have you used online mediations to make people feel safe and address cases where there's alleged family violence?
It's essential that the person that is in fear, for whatever reason, whether it's a rational fear or an irrational fear, that they feel heard. And so many times I will do a phone consult with them and ask them what they need to feel safe. And my job is to empower them. If it's not a level playing field, then mediation is probably not going to be successful, and it's probably not a good time for mediation. So normally when the person feels heard and respected, and then they feel empowered and the fear goes away. People cannot mediate when they're in the fear mode. They're not thinking clearly. So as a mediator, it's essential for me to make them feel that they're heard, they're respected, and that I will do everything in my power to help them through this process. And oftentimes I can hear a sigh of relief about, oh God, someone's listening to me. And then we can mediate.
And then in online mediation, really putting people into two separate breakout rooms makes them really feel safe. They don't even have to look at the person of whom they are afraid. And also they don't have to listen to their voice. So a wise mediator can organize the mediation space, both physically and online, to the way that even this online environment is helpful and nobody feels threatened.
Okay, so let's discuss when children are involved, right? Or when people are in a relationship. Well, I guess if you're in a relationship and you don't have any children together, then there's probably no reason for you to be around each other or to even be negotiating things, unless it's a divorce, of course. But when kids are together, when kids are involved, then even though the relationship between the man and the woman or the partners is dissolved, they're still together in a way because they have to communicate over the kids. And so this problem then sheds a whole new light on custody cases, divorce cases, any kind of case where you're having to do some kind of judgment or long-term order. You have to address this. Now, when you're going to go to a mediation table and sit down and talk about these things, you have to consider, well, there's a child involved. I can't just say party X will no longer ever speak to party Y, or party X must stay 200 feet away from party Y. If there's a child involved, we got to find new ways and new tools to help try to allow all parties to feel safe, while at the same time making sure that the child basically is kept out of it and kept safe. And one of the tools that we like to use are these parent communication tools, for example. I know that there's ourfamilywizard.com, there's appclose.com, talkingparents.com. Fran, can you give your experience with using these tools in the family kind of cases when domestic violence is alleged?
Yes, I think that the communication tools that are used in the United States, and I don't know if they're used throughout the world, but perhaps the world will finally catch up. These communication tools tend to eliminate the he said, she said issues, because the judge or an advocate, the attorney for the children, can always log in and look at all the communication. So, for example, if one parent says, "How are the kids?" and the other parent never responds, then that shows they're not co-parenting. So many times with the abused person, I encourage them after the mediation to go into counseling and to become stronger and to move their buttons. If their ex knows where their buttons are, they need to learn how not to be triggered and how to respond to the other person. Even if they're not together, they're still going to have to co-parent. They're still going to bump into each other. Plus, many policing organizations now have cameras and exchange places in their parking lots to try to eliminate issues when they're exchanging the children. In Texas, you can send a third party to exchanges. I encourage that. Or in Texas, I encourage exchanges to be done through the school so that parents don't have to see each other. There are things that we can do to be creative and think outside the box to try to keep the two parties apart from each other, but still co-parenting the children. Children need both parents. This mental health experts have come down on that more and more. Many years ago, it was thought fathers weren't that important. But as time has gone on, they're finding that children need their moms and their dads.
And speaking about that, I need to say that when we talk about domestic violence, we of course see the violence between the spouses, and it's let us admit that it's not just men who mistreat women. There are also cases of men being mistreated by the wives or even mothers-in-law, which was recently a case of my client who visited me in the office. And we need to be aware of that. And sometimes we need to be also brave enough and bold to ask certain questions, to even see ourselves when parties have no attorneys, whether this issue is really in place. Because if someone is feared, they are not going to negotiate fairly. They are not going to be listening to what is happening there. And last but not least, there are also instances of family violence where the victims are the elderly members of the family, and sometimes also the disabled members of the family. This is very widely spread, and the awareness is only starting to be built here in Poland about it. But whenever we have a case that can be a family case between an elderly parent and a kid, or that can be a case about the contacts with grandparents, where you have the kid and an elderly grandfather, grandmother. And we need to be aware and also just have our eyes wide open for identifying those issues and making people comfortable in mediation. Again, online mediation and its tools are of help.
Yes. So before we speak about protective orders or let Fran talk about protective orders, and also I hope that's not for you. I think that's too serious. But I wanted to speak about men generally. Give me a second. So that sounds kind of fitting in some ways to what we're talking about. And hopefully everything works out for whoever might be in an emergency. But I got to say a word about men. Just a lot of times, most of the time, I would say, the family violence is being directed against women by men. Okay. And a lot of times men don't like to talk about this topic because sometimes the finger pointing happens. Sometimes the family violence is actually not true. It did not happen, but the person who's the alleged victim points the finger back and accuses somebody of having done it. So this is why even in our title today, we say when family violence is alleged, because a lot of times there's he said, she said, and where people on their power trips use tactics against the other. So, but just to speak to men for a second, men, if you are a victim of family violence, because you can very well be, make sure that you speak out and say something about it, because I promise you, if the shoe was on the other foot, it more likely will be addressed. But guys don't, for various reasons, don't like to discuss when they're being abused, okay? Especially if they feel that they're going to be considered less macho or less masculine. But the truth of the matter is, there's never any room for abuse, okay? Especially if children are observing it. Not that a child observing it justifies it to be said even more, but especially when children are observing it, because children are impressionable, they can be taught. So, for example, if a man is sitting there allowing himself to be beaten up and hurt when he has the ability to stop it by speaking up and saying something, there are children, girls and boys, who are watching this, who potentially will think this is normal. And this problem could then spill over to the next generation. And in a way, it is a form of child abuse, because then these children are being given a warped version of human relationships. And the way to address it is to speak up and say something. And too often, guys don't. And that actually just promotes the problem even more. Okay. So men beat up women, women beat up men. It's usually men against women. But the point of the matter is, it all needs to stop. The bullying needs to stop. The harassment needs to stop. And the only way it's going to stop is if you say something, okay? Not care about what other people might think of you, but stopping violence for the sake of itself, because it's wrong. So, but Fran, can you go into protective orders a little bit, especially from your experiences, and then we can move on to some stories. We got about 4 minutes left, guys.
Well, in Texas, we have a document. We have a restraining order. It's not very powerful. The more powerful document is called a protective order. Other states, other countries may call them something else. But a lady called me once and said, "Can you guarantee my safety?" And I said, "Honey, I can handcuff us to each other. I can get an Uzi, I can get a machine gun, and I cannot guarantee your safety, because a piece of paper does not stop bullets, knives, or fists." And so even with a protective order, you have to be careful. And I warn people that many times when a relationship is ending, it is the most dangerous time in their relationship. Emotions are raw. People are hurt, and they act out in irrational behavior. I often say, when you're going through a divorce or you're ending a relationship, everyone is temporarily crazy for a little while. And people that are sane and rational most of the time suddenly do bizarre, weird things. And so it is very important that even if there wasn't violence all through your relationship, that when you're separating, that you be extra careful. Like I said earlier, if your gut tells you something, trust it. I've done some mediations where when I separate the people, and usually in this case, I'll say it was a man. They didn't want me to put their spouse in another room. And when I did, this happened to me 3 times in a couple of years. The spouses burst into tears and said, "If I don't sign that mediated settlement agreement, he's going to kill me." And in all of those cases, I asked the gentleman to leave. I refunded the money 100%, and I stopped the mediation, because that is not appropriate. And in one case, I sent the woman to a shelter because it wasn't safe for her to go home.
And I need to tell you something. Sometimes even the negotiation process of mediation settlement process can incentivize people to become aggressive. I had a case like that. 2 spouses with a disabled kid were negotiating with me the conditions for the divorce. And it went quite smoothly, I need to say. It took us just an hour, and we agreed on everything, including the child support. And they left. Half an hour later, the lady called me that the man has beaten her up and that the police is coming to see them about what happened between them. And there were never earlier any cases of domestic violence. It's just the situation of facing the issue of divorcing, facing the issue of sharing custody, facing the issue of some financial settlement that will influence the situation, the financial situation, usually of a man long term. That makes such a stress on certain people that they can no longer be responsible for what they are doing. So be careful also, and watch everything, every sign that can give you any slightest reason to fear for yourself, maybe delay you coming back home. Just think about yourself in terms that you are not always safe, even if the agreement has been reached.
Yes, thank you. Well said. So, guys, as we wrap up, I guess the takeaway from the day is to make sure that remember that you're empowered. Okay, there are resources out there. Okay, there's actually the National Domestic Violence Awareness Month was created in 1989, and since then, this is October. It's coming around pretty soon. Since then, it's been a time to acknowledge domestic violence survivors and be a voice for its victims. Domestic violence is prevalent in every community and affects all people, regardless of age, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, gender, race, religion, nationality. Physical violence is often accompanied by emotionally abusive and controlling behavior as part of a larger systematic pattern of dominance and control. Domestic violence can result in physical injury, psychological trauma, and even death. And the devastating consequences of domestic violence can cross generations and last a lifetime. So, this topic is extremely important, which is why we always want to keep revisiting it because it continues to be a problem. We're going to be doing another show pretty soon with another speaker on sexual harassment in the workplace, because that's another form of violence against people. Okay, that's going to be related to the age of Me Too. But Fran, thank you so much for your time and contribution to this topic. I know it's something that's dear to your heart, and we'll see you next time and keep talking about it, guys.
Thank you so much. See you soon.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.